Hi, welcome to LearnUp Center's Tattum Talks. This is an occasional conversation about hot topics in the reading and how to teach kids how to read. My name is Steve Hagler. I'm the Executive Director of LearnUp Centers. I'm here with Steve Tattum, Learning Director of LearnUp Centers. LearnUp Centers is a nonprofit literacy center based in San Francisco on a mission to change how we teach all levels and types of readers to read. And we do that through one-on-one tutoring and through training educators in our community how to teach reading. And I'm with Steve Tattum. He's an expert in dyslexia and teaching reading, has been working in the field for over 40 years. And I'd like Steve to introduce himself, a little bit of his background, and tell us what you've learned over the last 40 years in reading, Steve.
Okay. Well, I started.
I can't hear you, Steve. Hold on 2 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I started in the reading field in the early 70s, and I was involved in an Orton-Gillingham program, which is, I consider, the grandfather of dyslexia, the reading methods for dyslexia. And it's part of it was Slingerland. It's part of the Orton-Gillingham, where there's 20 some different programs such as Wilson and Project Read and many others that are involved. So I started with that program. And then I got involved in alphabetic phonics and I went through 5 different programs and did them pretty purely. And then I realized, hey, there's a faster way of doing this. I got involved in a full reading because I worked in a school. And so I couldn't just teach phonics. I had to teach teachers how to teach phonics, how to teach directed reading with novels, and how to go to whole language where they had choice on books and writing. So I did that for 35 years at Denver Academy, trained the teachers in these 3 levels of approach. Meanwhile, I continued to improve on my methods in reading, and basically in 1997 merged all the systems into what I now call Tattum Reading. In Michigan, it's called Fast Reading. I'm now the reading director at Stern School and reading director at the LearnUp Centers.
That's awesome. So can you talk a little bit about why it is that some kids seem to learn how to read without any real troubles and others seem to struggle so hard? I mean, when I was an educator and teaching kids in high school, it seemed like, some of my kids never read for me, and we used to think, well, maybe they just aren't trying hard enough, or some people call them lazy. And now, after being in this position with LearnUp Centers and learning a lot about reading, I know that's not true. So can you describe a little bit of what's going on there?
Sure. Well, it has to do with linguistic gifts, and gifts. There's multiple gifts. We all have, in terms of multiple intelligences, up to 9 different gifts, according to Gardner. But if kids are born with linguistic wiring that is intact, they'll learn to read any method. So they'll do okay in kindergarten and in first grade, whatever method, they'll figure it out. That can be 60% of our population. In areas that have where you have students that are not being read to, there's little language at home, and there's not a lot of discussion. These kids there'll be a higher percentage of difficult readers, up to 60% in that community. But generally, it's 60%. Kids will learn any method. 40% will struggle for various reasons.
So can you talk a little bit about dyslexia and why it's difficult for kids with dyslexia to learn to read? I know she didn't use the term, but we're 1 in 5 or 20% of our kids we suspect that have a neurological processing issue, correct?
Yeah. Of that 40% that are struggling with reading, 20% are on the continuum of dyslexia. The other 20% are having difficulty reading because of the method used. Again, maybe not having a lot of language at home, etc. So it has to do with their sociological background and the methodologies they're taught at the various school, and maybe behavioral issues that they've had. But the 20% of kids who are dyslexia, it has to do with a neurological wiring, and they have trouble with sounds. I call it, Dr. Shaywitz, who wrote Overcoming Dyslexia, a monumental piece of work, calls it fuzzy sounds. They don't quite hear the sounds exactly. They don't hear the sounds in words. It's kind of merged. And they're the ones that we're going to call spaghetti puschetti, tornado, volcano. It sounds like it. They'll have a lot of little changes in words, and it's because they're not hearing the sounds exactly. So that'll occur, and then they have trouble with rhymes when they're young. So you'll have these issues. And then in kindergarten, they're just having trouble locating sounds. So if you have them tap out a word like hit and break the word in the sounds hit, they can't hear those individual sounds. And so come first grade, 30% of kids can't hear those individual sounds. And those kids are the ones that have problems. So you have this difficulty in these fuzzy sounds early on and manifested in kindergarten. They're having trouble cutting off the first sound, bat without the b, or the last sound. And you put this together, they have trouble. Many times they're taught letter names in kindergarten. And for these kids, it's sounds. Forget letter name. You want to teach the sounds. You want a connection between b, b, k. Note it's not b, it's b, d, g. Clean sounds. That needs to be done first with these kids. Then you teach letter names later. But if you teach the letter names first with these kids and then go to sounds, they're going to have proactive interference where the letter names are going to interfere with the sounds. So in my kindergarten program, we go right into sounds. So it has to do with a fuzzy sound problem.
And can you, in our program, we talk about the word formulary firing. Can you talk a little bit about the phonological processing and
Sure.
why that's so important in a reading program?
Right. So phonological processing is usually dealing with the general phonology of sounds like rhymes, tapping out syllables, etc. It's phonemic awareness, the individual sound, that's really crucial and correlates with first grade success. So what happens is, in order for you to have excellent phonemic awareness, you need to be using the this area of the brain, which is called Broca's area. And this is the area that's involved in speech. So this area has to be able to sound out, say the sounds, but keep them distinct, not fuzzy. And when that happens, it connects above the ear to an area called Wernicke's area. We'll call it the language area. So we'll call this the sounding out and the language area. So this helps sound it out, and the language area goes, oh, I know that word. That's fat. That's cat. That's run. Okay. Now, when this happens, automatically for gifted kids, gifted in linguistic, again, there's 11 different gifts, the word form area fires, and the word form area starts remembering these words. We used to think you needed up to 5 to 7 interactions with a word to remember. Now we know it's like 1 to 3. If you read the word, you get it. So the word form area fires. And so early on, they start logging all these words for reading and spelling in first grade, and they become your good readers and spellers. Meanwhile, the child with dyslexia, the connection here to here is not going well. They're not hearing the individual sounds. They're not stimulating the word form area. And therefore, they're having trouble even sounding out words, but they're not often taught phonics. So that's even, they're not stimulating the word form area. So the deal is with this problem, a sight word approach with kids with dyslexia is a total waste of time because their word form area is not firing. I've had kids who've gone 200 hours in sight word, yet they are at the beginning of my program because they don't remember the sight words. So my whole program is focused on stimulating the word form area behind the ear. That's my entire focus of the program. And I do that by stimulating Broca's area and Wernicke's area a lot. I just had a child with dyslexia I've been working with now for about 6-7 months. And his word form area started firing about 6 weeks ago. And he could not remember words to save his life. Now when he reads a word, he remembers it. And he's logging all these words. His fluency doubled once his word form area was firing because he'd remember words. So the problem is the interaction of the phonological processors with the word form area and getting that to fire.
That's really interesting. So do all dyslexics or kids who are struggling to learn how to read start to learn how to read at the same place, at the same level, or in the same way, or is there different ways to get at different types of learners?
Yeah. Again, if you have linguistic abilities, you can learn any method. So the current methods, which are kind of a combination of a little phonics and a lot of whole language, for a child who who is linguistically talented, they'll learn that method, and that's fine. But again, they may have problems with spelling, though. Those kids will learn to read. But there's that other 40%, some who just haven't been taught properly, whose processors are not as good, or they've been linguistically deprived, even though their processors are fine, they were linguistically deprived. And then you have the children with dyslexia. They have to have phonics. Now, the group that's not dyslexia can do some phonics scattered and possibly learn to read okay. But if you have dyslexia, it must be a systematic approach. And that's what I recommend for all programs. You see, what's happened in education is education should begin with systematic phonics, then directed reading, where you teach them how to apply phonics to novels, and then whole language, where a child picks books, writes reactions to books, is doing written journals, writing journals, reading journals, and the whole language model as nicely depicted by Nancy Atwell and Linda Reef, which I used myself for high school kids. That's kind of the pinnacle. And you've got your phonics down, you can read and spell. You've now done directed reading where you know how to comprehend text. You know how to annotate text. You also know how to break words into syllables, and then you move to whole language. The problem is that pyramid's slipped. So the whole language being on top, it's starting here at the beginning. And for 40%, that's not working.
So you're talking about the kind of having a reading program that has the flexibility to go to where the child is.
That's right.
But are you saying that all kids should learn with a structured phonics or explicit phonics program first, and then
keep in mind you have the linguistically talented. So you should have phonics for all kids, for spelling, if nothing else, and for word attack. We found that even your best readers, whole language is taking the position that good readers read past a word and then from context get it. We know that's not true. Your best readers are basically breaking words into syllables with their eyes. We know that from eye movement studying. So, we want to make sure that there is some phonics for these kids. But what we don't want to do is the reverse problem of kids with dyslexia. We're putting a whole language program and they're basically not getting their phonics. Well, if you got a gifted, talented kid, you want to be doing whole language along with the phonics. So you want them to have choice of books. You want them to write reading journals. You want to have meetings with them, conferences with them. You want language conferences. So you have to merge the two.
Got it. And are these the programs that they're using in schools today, or what's
primarily no. I've worked with over 4,000 teachers, and I found teachers generally don't know phonics. They don't even know how to make their sounds. It's funny, even scholars who write about it don't know how to make their sounds, because when I hear their audible books, I'm correcting. No, it's not but. It's not ka. So even professionals don't know how to make their sounds. So number one, people are not taught phonics, and schools don't teach it. Now that's changing in Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia, one of my teachers has been supported by the school to teach my systematic phonics program as a basis of phonics, and then to do labs with kids, and then to have extension methods. It's a real breakthrough. But it's generally not. What's taught is what's called the 3Q system. And that's where kids are not taught to break words down systematically through word attack, but they're taught a cue like, what's the cover like? What do you see? What are some key words here? You can guess the word if you don't know it. If you know the letter, guess what letter fits. And what makes sense in terms of syntax. It's a verb there, so it's probably an action word. So you use these cues. And studies indicate good readers don't do that. Good readers quickly parse words into syllables.
So, you're now talking about like having a structured literacy program. You go from structured phonics to directed reading to whole language. But there's a lot of different structured phonics on the market, and you're hearing a lot about different Orton-Gillingham programs and other major reading programs. What have you found over the years that you're doing now that is different than those programs? Because you're saying that it's based in Orton-Gillingham, but how is it different than what's being typically taught?
My program is much faster.
What do you mean by that?
Speed of light compared to these other programs. And the reason is I did them all. And one thing they do, keep in mind that these programs, most of the phonics programs come out of Sam Orton's neurological work. And he found that kids were flipping letters, flipping sounds. And his view with the right hemisphere was a kind of a duplicate of the left. And the flipping letters is you were using the right hemisphere. So he felt you tied down the letter. He believed in the Fernald method by copying and writing the letters so they don't flip. We now know that that's not the issue. Visual's not the issue. We know that from having kids copy letters. They can copy them correctly and then they read them incorrectly. It's a linguistic problem. They're not labeling it properly. It's not the tying down with the hand. So the methods were you tied down each letter with 8 linkages. Well, when I started to see The Emperor Without Clothes, as I was teaching a class using the linkages for 3 months, and we were like, it takes forever. You're at consonants, vowels, and teams and blends. And I had some kids entering school, how that is, and thrown in the group. So I had to catch them up in a few days. And lo and behold, they, within a couple of weeks, were doing as well as the group I did the linkages with. So I started to relook at other methods. I looked at the LIPS program, who doesn't do linkages, but they tie things to oral motor or mouth. And that works spectacularly. I realized that the oral motor wasn't the key connection for kids with dyslexia. I tie it to body movements. But the deal is mine goes much quicker. In fact, almost every kid I work with, I clean up all the consonants and vowels day one, if they're a first grader or higher. Now, for kids who are not that way, I clean up 4 consonants and 1 vowel day one, and I put them in a book. Every kid I ever work with is in a book day one and reading. Half my period's reading. That's a big difference between other programs. Most of them, in fact, in many of the programs I've talked to teachers, I said, when do you do reading? They said, well, we don't have time. We'll teach them how to open a dictionary. We teach them how to name letters. We teach them how to do the sounds. We teach them how to spell the sounds. We do new concept. We teach handwriting. We teach spelling, and we have time to sound out words. We don't have time to read. I never do any reading. Half my period's reading, This is about teaching reading, not phonics. Phonics is not the goal. It's the vehicle to the destination.
Can you talk a little bit about the entry levels that we talk about reading a little bit differently than many other programs do. So you talk a little bit about the entry levels and how we determine where a child is on the reading spectrum?
Sure. I have a scope and sequence. If we can put that up, I can show that. There we go. Can we enlarge that? If we can't, that's all right. Now, you'll notice the middle column has yellow in it. Okay. Now, that's my scope and sequence. It's very similar to an Orton-Gillingham scope and sequence that's used in over 20-some Orton-Gillingham programs. But it starts with, at the very top, can you see the arrow? No. The very top here, you will introduce consonants and short vowels, and then you'll introduce some spelling rules, and then you'll introduce how to break words into syllables, and then you'll teach what's called the R family, diphthongs, etc. Now, beginning students start at the top. So if you look at the yellows, I call that the yellow brick road. If you look at the top there, it says pre-concept and concept 1, and that's where you're teaching the consonants and vowels. And again, I'm not doing 1 a day of consonants. I'm not doing each blend. There's 50-some blends. I teach that through what I call my active processing work. So I clean up the consonants and vowels. Now, that would be a child who's often has a severe form of dyslexia. 1.5% of the population have severe dyslexia. No word form area. They can't remember a word if they sound it out. Okay. So many of these kids will start and go straight through this sequence. And it might take anywhere from 120 to 150, 180 hours to get them to grade level if they're second, third grade. And then you have kids who can't even enter the sequence because they're at their kindergarten level. Those are the ones I begin with 4 consonants of vowel and get them in a book day 1. By the way, Dr. Shaywitz feels that's important to get kids in a book immediately. And she has written the book on dyslexia. Now, I've had kids, they've been kicking around the block. They kind of know the consonants and vowels. They need to get them cleaner because they're doing ba, ka, so I have to clean them up, but I can put them in a 2-syllable approach, which is about a third way down the sequence. I quickly catch up to there, but I'll put them in a 2-syllable book, which, it'll be like at mid-second grade rather than at the first grade. But I'll have also kids who have been around the block, who've had some phonics, who are up to like 2/3 through the program. So I'll catch them up. I'll quickly clean up their consonants, make sure they know it. I'll teach the R family, R, and R. I'll teach the diphthongs, aw, oi, ow, oo, and catch them up, and then put them in an advanced book that hits that area. So I go to the level of the child. That saves years, not months. I mean, it'll take some programs years to get where I'll get day one. And those higher kids, I teach phrasing the first week, how to phrase read. So it has to do with the speed in which we deliver. And it also has to do with, I've written, and with my son, I've written 14 reading series for all age levels. So if I have a child reading first grade who's 7th grade, he's in my action series called The Fog. If I have a kid reading first grade who's high school, he's in my Chronicles of Yore that goes first grade through 10th grade. If I have a first grader who's reading first grade, he's in my first grade series. So I've written series for all levels so you can enter in without turning off the student. And to the left of the yellow brick road are all the series and what books correlate with what concept. So there'll be like 6, 7 different series that correlate with that concept. So if a child's struggling with, let's say, the diphthongs, oi, ow, oo, aw, etc., there's like 6, 7 different diphthong books you can go to tie that concept down. So these are a few of the differences. The other difference is my magnetic board, if we could show that. Now, this is a board that rather than doing flashcards, which bores kids to death, I basically say the sounds every day, and the child will point to the sounds. So I'll be going, and they'll point to F and PH. I'll go ch, they'll point to CH and TCH. I'll go oi, and they'll point to OY, OI, etc. And then I'll point to the sounds, and they'll read it. That's in place of DEX. It takes 2 to 3 minutes rather than 15 to 20. Okay. Then I will give nonsense words that they will build from the board. If they're dealing with the diphthongs, the aw, oo, ow, and oi. If they're dealing with that, I might give a word like choip, make it choip, make it thoup, make it choup, make it chouks. I'm having them basically use advanced phonemic awareness, but with letters to change sounds, to learn how to use the sounds. This is what activates the code. And then I'll go into the book. So that's this magnetic board that makes the program more exciting and more fun. Also, it's easy to memorize. I want you to look at the short vowels and the diphthongs. Oi. That's a Big Dipper, like in the sky. Then I want you to look at the R family, or. That's like a crescent moon. And then below it is the earth. You have the green grass on top of it, the yellow and red iron ore below it. My advanced kids can recite this from memory because it's clustered together. That's different than all the other approaches.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I've seen students of yours come back 10, 15 years later, and they can still memorize the board. You've had them close their eyes, and they still have it memorized, and they still use it in their daily reading.
Is J.T. Mestaw, who had severe dyslexia. He now reads at an adult level. He reads slower, like 90 to 100 words a minute. He wrote a book, Untethered, about his experiences with dyslexia and his experiences with a neurological and physiological problem he had, and has written a book, Untethered, about that. Actually, tomorrow he's getting an award from Grosse Pointe Yacht Club for his services to kids in hospitals and with dyslexia.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible. So what's the difference between like what you're doing at LearnUp now and other reading programs? Like, what are some of the advantages of being in a program that's like when we built LearnUp, how did we think about it differently than other reading clinics you've been with?
Well, number one is, again, the speed at which we do this. So from testing, I can get an approximation how long it takes. Since I'm not teaching a sound every day, I know if I know a child's at a beginning of the program, which I call start one, I might say he needs 120 hours. He needs this series. Our goal to get him is maybe at 2.8 at 70 words a minute in that time. And he's maybe reading a pre-primer. I get a higher kid, start 4, who's reading maybe 55 words a minute and written around 2nd grade. My goal may be get 4th grade, 120 words a minute in 60 to 80 hours. So I will give approximate time, what we're trying to get. And then I choose the right series for the child. Because I've written enough series, I can find something he'll like. And that's crucial, because getting a kid to read and they don't like reading doesn't work. We got to get them to read.
Yeah, I
So
think we have something like 14 series now that we work out of. So
yeah,
there's a lot of variety.
right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the idea of a free reading assessment, one where we're looking at where they are on the reading spectrum and where to put them, then
Yeah.
be able to say, well, here are your key performance indicators. Here's your reading goals, and we want you to be able to decode at this level of grade level, and we want to be able to figure out what reading spelling rules they're going to have, what writing goals they're going to have, and then saying this is also contained in some an estimate amount of time that we believe that we can achieve these goals. I think is fundamentally different because, I mean, the goal here is not to have these kids in tutoring for the rest of their lives. The goal here is to have them out playing, out in the yard, playing baseball or doing whatever they do besides tutoring. We really want these kids out and about.
Yeah, I did. Well, these guys, the kids with dyslexia would have been the go-to guy back in the Westerns, or go-to girl. They're common sense. See, kids with dyslexia think 3-dimensionally. They can rotate objects in space. That's why they're great engineers, great designers, etc. They also have the ability to see patterns other people don't see, and they can make connections that people don't have. And believe it or not, they have great upper linguistic skills of comprehension and storytelling. One of my children with dyslexia is writing a novel now about surfing, and it's just great. And they have no problems in upper linguistic. It's only in the lower area of phonology and orthography, which is spelling. And that gets resolved once the word form area fires.
So we're kind of towards the end of the program here. What's different? Let me just talk a little bit about what's different this year for us than previous years, and then we'll take some questions if there's some you want to put your questions into the chat. So this summer we're going to be doing 1-week sprints. I mean, as COVID is starting to wind down a little bit and people are moving around, we're seeing families moving and not able to be there every week. We recommend typically that families put their heads down and sprint for as long as it takes to get their kid to meeting their reading goals. This summer we're doing 1-week sprints where you can pick and choose your weeks and your hours and come as much as you're available, because we do believe it's better to do as much as you can than it is to skip the summer and have them come back in the fall. You can reach us at Learn to Read at LearnUp Centers if you're interested in learning more about that, or go on our website at learnupcenters.org. And Steve, I know that you always are interested in helping families figure out where it is their child is in the reading spectrum. And do we test kids and find that they don't need us, that they're actually able to do more than they think they can?
With students, sure. Oh yeah, I've tested kids and said he doesn't need our program. He just needs to become a reader. Just get him in some good books, and I'd recommend, because when students leave, I recommend that they get involved in series. So my older kids, they really like the Hatchet series, my older boys, and so one of them's read 4 of those. He's just become a reader through that. I also recommend kids read magazines of areas of interest, because they'll read. That's what JT Mestaw did. He read a lot of magazines. So yeah, some kids don't need it or need the higher level program, because I do have an element of whole language in my upper level program where it's all about reading and having them writing and doing some comprehension work.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. And before we move away from it, when I read about reading programs on the market, I'm hearing like, do you do a phonics program? Do you do a spelling program? Do you do a writing program? Do you do a comprehension program? What I notice about your program is that it's all one. It's not, you don't separate them out. It's all combined together. Talk about that for a second. Like, why is that?
Well, they do separate if a child is an upper level of reading, but at the start, it's all neurologically connected. So actually hearing the sounds and saying the sounds, hearing the sounds and pointing is really the beginning of spelling, is recognizing the sounds. Spelling syllables and reading syllables go hand in hand. Spelling real words and reading them go hand in hand. So they reinforce each other, especially at the lower levels. But if I have a child who's a higher reader, their reading may be way ahead of spelling. So they may be an upper level of that yellow brick road, but in spelling, they don't know how to like double letters when there's a vowel suffix. So they may be way ahead. But at the beginning level, it's best to correlate. Orton-Gillingham knows that, and they do a great job with that, to correlate the two.
And can you talk a little bit about what you do with a kid who is struggling to break down multisyllabic words and chooses to guess versus decode? Like,
yeah.
How
Well,
does one do that?
it starts with this. You first got to get them quick at one syllable words. So kids will go pit, pit. We got to get them to go pit, have, tab. So I have a list called diagnostic syllables for every concept. And they're, going ab, cab. So I'll do beat the coach, which is you got 3 seconds to get the word, or I get it and I win that word. And there'll be like 10 words. So they'll go at, and I'll go fat, that's my word. And then they'll go, I'll go run, that's my word. Well, now they get fit, cab, run. And then eventually I win the first one or two, and then they start beating me. I got to get syllables fast. Then I got to teach 2 syllable rules. I call it the vowel tag. In Orton, it's called vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, how to break words down into syllables real quick. So I've got to get that going. Okay, then I got to time them on getting speed. I'll do beat the coach with 2 syllable words. Okay, then I go to big multi-syllable nonsense words like exploinertlar, pro ni na loy, and we work on that in what I call words in quotes. And then I pulled out words from Jurassic Park, which are really involved upper level words, and we practice speed of working that. And then I do not let a child guess when he's reading. When he's following my finger, and when he guesses a word, I circle it, and he cannot go on without saying the word. I will not let him go further until he sounds out the word.
And so what other distinguishing parts of the program would you say to a parent? So the parents are out looking for various programs this summer. They're trying to find what's going to work and bring their kid along as fast as they can so that they can build confidence. And, this year we're worried a lot about, whether or not there's been, some learning stall or kids have not been as engaged in school this year. Like, what advice do you give to parents when they're out there? I mean, they're looking for these programs, and what do you think they should be looking for?
Well, first, I agree with the Reading League and Dr. Shaywitz that there's 2 components of reading, the phonetic component and linguistic competency. So some kids, they don't need phonics. Their problem is linguistic competency. So we got to work on language, we got to work on vocabulary, and then we got to get them to be able to do a gist sentence. Somebody did something because, and then 3 types of inference: infer across a sentence, draw conclusions across paragraphs, predict across pages. 3 types of inference. And then we need to have them be able to end with the W's: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Comprehension, linguistic competence for some kids. So number 1, people got to get that straight. And number 2 is they'll call kids with comprehension problems, and they're not. They just can't sound out the word. So they'll put them in a comprehension program, which is a total waste of time because that's not his problem. If you can't read the words, obviously you're not going to comprehend. So 1 is just getting the correct program is the crucial aspect. And that's hard to find because, number 1, people aren't in the field as long as I am. So I've made every mistake in the book. Everyone. Can't imagine mistakes I made. But fortunately, I've corrected them. A lot of people are still in the correcting mistakes phase. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that every 3 or 4 months we're updating our manuals and updating our materials because we find that something else works better.
Yeah, I worked with 5 kids, well, actually 7 kids this year, and I made changes to help. A big problem with Zoom is attention issues, and I've made changes to get it. I made a total change for kids that have an attitude, that don't want to read, they hate it, they're fighting. It's our reluctant learner approach, which has 3 games built into it, and that's modified specifically for these kids.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've seen a lot of reluctant learners this year from all types of backgrounds, and I found it really interesting. Having worked with high school kids who were not particularly happy to be in school, that they would have benefited from this idea of how do I get you to read as quickly as I can and get you to understand that reading is important and that you can do it. and have it happen in a very short period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I think we've hit on, this new program, this new approach that actually I think gets at that,
Yeah.
which I think is very cool. It's a nice update.
Yeah. Well, again, the old-fashioned idea of reading to your child on a daily basis. Read to them. Don't ask a lot of questions while you're reading. Just read it so he enjoys it. Then you can ask some questions once you're through with that. Sometimes when you're reading, point to words so he makes the connection. You don't have to always do that, but you can do that. And getting them to do rhymes is real important, because that's helping set and being able to cut off the initial consonant as a start. What do we have with bat without the b? Okay. Getting them to cut that off, just working those sounds and doing the reading with child is helpful as a start. And then if they're having trouble with rhymes, if they're mixing up words, spaghetti for spaghetti, then early on at kindergarten and that, let's look into it, pre-kindergarten. Dr. Shaywitz has some tests that are, can be used at preschool.
So, I mean, one other piece that I think is really important is that at LearnUp Centers, one of the goals is to be able to work with all types of backgrounds, and we offer a free reading assessment to be able to tell just exactly this, like where on the reading spectrum of this kid who can't do any sounds to a kid who's doing comprehension and fluency work, where are they? And so if parents are interested in that, they can reach out to us at learnupcenters.org, learn to read at learnupcenters.org, and we offer a remote reading assessment where our staff will take a look at your child reading and give you our assessment of what's going on and what kind of program we would recommend. So that's out there. If folks are interested, that we do this as a public service, because we don't feel like access to good quality assessments should be keeping parents from getting the programs they need and the information they need. Is there anything else you'd like to offer, Steve, that before we close here?
No, it's if you've tried some things that haven't worked, try us. The beauty, again, one of the beauties of our program is I start you where you're at. So if you put 2 years in a program and it's not working, I give the kid credit for everything they were taught day one and start them right where they are. That's the main difference between us and any other program. So your child, one example is I had a child do Orton for a couple of years, and he could sound out any word, but he's reading 50 words a minute. So I taught him phrase reading, and this was during a workshop. And in teaching phrase reading, he went from 55 to 110 words a minute in 15 minutes. Well, I had a workshop with 20 people. I was doing it, and they thought it was all a con. I was surprised as they were. Well, he had what Pinker and Chomsky talks about, these linguistic processors that we have in our mind. Then his was very good. And he was able to understand the phrasing right off the bat and jump. So, yeah, don't give up, and we're the road, And if you got a higher child, an older child who's just given up and doesn't want to do it, get Ben Foss's book, The Dyslexia Empowerment Plan. And that's for kids who don't want to learn reading, and it deals with Audible, dictation software, etc. I have used that approach with a couple kids who don't want to learn to read, and this can help them get by.
It's interesting because the reading is only one piece of it, right? Because I remember we had a child who came through who wasn't reading very well, and then we taught him to read the grade level, and his mom brought him back, and you put him through a whole new battery of assessments because the family was saying that he was not reading it at grade level, and he assessed above grade level with us.
Yeah.
And I remember you stopped in the middle of that assessment and you went like, "Do you think you can read?" And the child said no. And so the idea of we have to build not just the reading skills, we also have to build the self-esteem and confidence of our children so that they understand that they can do the things that they want to do, that they have the abilities to do what they want to do is one piece of the puzzle, right? It's the combination of both having the reading skills and also the confidence to use them.
Right.
And so it's an interesting world we live in as we try to push kids forward and to reach their potential that they have within them.
Right. Great.
So I know that they're putting up a slide here calling how to register for summer sprints. If you have more questions, you can reach out to us directly on our phone at 415-944-7323 to talk to us directly, or you can reach out via email, learn-to-read@learnupcenters.org. We can do the reading assessments. We also will put you through to our sign-up forms to get summer reading help. Hey, Steve, thank you so much for talking today. I really appreciate taking the time and having this conversation. I look forward to having more.
Great being here.
Thank you to everybody for watching. Bye.
Bye.